She was the last person anyone expected to unravel. Friends described her as steady, warm, the kind of woman who remembered your birthday even when you forgot your own. For 32 years, her personality had been the most predictable thing about her: measured, thoughtful, gentle. But everything changed on a cold November morning when she woke up feeling like her emotions had been swapped with someone else's. At 10 a.m., she hurled her phone across the room after a harmless message from her sister. By noon, she was laughing uncontrollably in the grocery store aisle, tears streaming down her face for no reason she could explain. And later that night, her husband found her sitting on the floor in total silence, staring at a blank wall as if waiting for it to blink. At first, people around her tried to explain it away. Stress, burnout, overwork. Because how else do you make sense of someone who goes from compassion to rage in seconds, from confident to terrified, from grounded to drifting? Mood swings were normal, they said. Everyone goes through phases. But the truth was quieter and far more sinister. Something was hijacking her from the inside out. And every day, it grew stronger. By mid-December, the transformation was undeniable. She snapped at strangers, cursed at loved ones, and spent hours pacing the house at 3 a.m. as if she were being chased by something only she could see. She bought plane tickets she never used, emptied her savings account into bizarre impulse purchases, and tore through friendships faster than she could apologize. Her husband described it like watching her personality glitch, moments of the old her flickering through before vanishing again. Her face looked the same, her voice was the same, but her mind felt like it had been rewired overnight. Doctors listened, but only halfway. Depression, one said. Anxiety, said another. Hormonal imbalance, possibly. They ran basic tests, prescribed sleeping pills, suggested therapy. Suggestions that made sense on paper until the day she collapsed in her office bathroom at 2 p.m., unable to stand, her heart racing like she'd sprinted a marathon. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Pupils dilated, skin pale, expression unfamiliar. For the first time, she felt afraid of herself. Weeks passed, and the symptoms multiply. Her period stopped, her blood pressure spiked unpredictably. She lost weight without trying. She started forgetting names she had known for years, faces that once felt like home. And whenever she tried to explain what she was going through, people told her she was overreacting, being dramatic, letting emotions get the best of her. She clung to their reassurance, desperate to believe that this was all in her head. But deep inside, she knew something else was pulling the string, something far beyond anxiety or stress. The turning point came one night at 4 a.m. Her husband found her sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching a glass of water with trembling hands. She wasn't crying, she wasn't angry, she just looked empty, like a switch had flipped and left her in low power mode. When he asked what was wrong, she said 6 words in a voice that didn't sound like her own. "I think I am disappearing from myself." He took her to the emergency room. The ER doctor glanced at her chart: erratic behavior, sudden aggression, panic attacks, amenorrhea, fatigue. He paused, then ordered one test no one had bothered to run yet, an MRI of her brain. She didn't think much of it as she slid into the machine at 6:30 a.m. The cold, metallic barrel hummed around her while she stared up at a ceiling she couldn't see, feeling oddly calm. She had no idea that within minutes, the machine would reveal a hidden enemy that had been dismantling her life piece by piece. When the radiologist stepped into the room, his face gave everything away. He asked her to wait for the doctor. She felt her chest tighten. The doctor finally arrived with images pulled up on a screen, a tiny shadow just a few millimeters sitting at the center of her brain, pressed against the master gland that controls nearly every hormone in the body. A pituitary microadenoma, small, silent, but devastating. It wasn't cancer, it wasn't lethal on its own, but it was releasing hormones like a broken faucet that couldn't be turned off, pouring cortisol and prolactin and growth factors into her bloodstream in wild, unregulated surges. Every emotional outburst, every impulse, every sleepless night, every moment she didn't feel like herself, it all traced back to that microscopic lump hijacking the command center of her endocrine system. The doctor explained how hormonal floods can mimic personality changes so convincingly that people often misjudge them as character flaws. But this was biology, not behavior. The tumor was pulling the levers. And she had been fighting a ghost she never knew existed. She felt the room sway as the truth sank in. For months she had been called dramatic, difficult, moody. She had blamed herself for every fractured relationship, every outburst, every irrational decision. And now she learned that none of it had ever been her fault. A single tiny growth had rearranged her entire emotional architecture. She wasn't losing her mind, she was being chemically puppeted by an intruder no one could see. Treatment options were laid out calmly, almost too calmly for what they meant. Medication could shrink the tumor, but slowly. Surgery was another path, threading instruments through the nasal cavity and sinus to reach the pituitary, a procedure that required precision down to fractions of millimeters. The risks were stark: organ dysfunction, infertility, irreversible hormone damage, but doing nothing was not an option. Without intervention, her hormones would continue to surge unpredictably, weakening her organs, fraying her psyche, and pushing her toward psychological collapse. She chose surgery. The morning of the operation, the hospital lights felt too bright. At 7 a.m., she signed papers with trembling hands, each signature a reminder of how fragile the brain can be. Her husband tried to reassure her, but his own eyes betrayed his fear. As she was wheeled into the operating room, she wondered how long the tumor had been shaping her life without permission, how many memories weren't really hers, how many decisions belonged to chemistry rather than choice. Inside her skull, surgeons navigated the labyrinth behind her nose, reaching the pituitary with instruments as delicate as the problem they aimed to fix. The tumor was small, but the consequences of touching the wrong nerve or vessel were enormous. Hours passed, then it was done. When she woke up in recovery, the world felt strangely quiet. Not emotionally quiet, biologically quiet. The static that had buzzed beneath her thoughts for months was gone. Her mind felt spacious again, like someone had finally cleared out a cluttered attic. She cried, but this time the tears made sense. They belonged to her, not to a misfire of hormones raging through her system. Recovery wasn't instant. Her body had to relearn the rhythm the tumor had disrupted. Her emotions didn't snap back like a rubber band. They settled gently, gradually, like a lake after a long storm. Some people she'd pushed away didn't come back, some wounds couldn't be undone. But for the first time in months, she recognized herself again when she looked in the mirror. And yet, one of the strangest realizations came later. How easily her suffering could have been dismissed forever. How close she came to losing everything because her symptoms looked like everyday struggles, mood swings, stress, irritability magnified to monstrous proportions by something no one could see. Her story became a reminder that the boundary between mind and body is thinner than anyone wants to believe. That personality isn't just shaped by experiences and choices, but also by the silent architecture of chemicals pulsing beneath the surface. That sometimes the difference between who you are and who you become can be only a few millimeters wide. She kept the MRI image, not as a trophy, but as proof that the darkest months of her life were not a moral failure or a psychological weakness. They were the fingerprints of a silent intruder that twisted her emotions, rewired her impulses, and nearly dismantled her world. And whenever she feels a flicker of fear, wondering if the old chaos might return, she looks at that image and remembers the truth. She was never the villain of her story. She was the battlefield, and she survived what tried to rewrite her from the inside out.